Well, greetings and salutations, folks. I hope everyone is doing well today. Today I have an upload just jam-packed full of terrifying experiences. Before we jump into it, a couple links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch is displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman, Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support the channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It does not cost you a cent. Click that like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads I put out daily, click that bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment. Why? Well, because all of these things really do help the channel to continue to grow and go. And folks, they definitely do matter. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump in to today's upload, shall we? Today's first encounter. First, let me start off by saying that English is not my primary language. Now, everyone here's camping goes with happiness and new experiences and new adventures. Our group was posted in a camp deep in the woods situated in Bulgaria. Honestly, we have our beliefs and folklore that we've all heard, but what we all saw was so different that even I cannot explain it. We prepared ourselves to have a good time, some booze, and a couple of treks up the mountain nearby. We arrived rather fast to the campus grounds, as I was sleeping deep and didn't recognize until my friend shook me awake. I blinked away the sleepiness. We got into separate rooms, men and women. We were all around 18 to 19 years old, and soon we were all set. The few days went like a flash, and we were accompanied by two elders that led the way to their local campfire grounds. It was far away from our camp, so we were hiking. Eventually, we were close to our destination, but they say when someone's staring at you, you feel their eyes boring into you, and that is what I felt. I was always a skeptic, but now all of my senses were heightened. Coming closer to the open space with a huge campfire, we all set up to do our little to-do lists. Some were finding branches and twigs, others were preparing food for the meal, and some were talking to the elders. When our group was done with all of our orders, we went to the watch point. It was like a watchtower, but without the amenities. It was open and huge. It could not allow many people on it and in it, but it was breathtaking. Coming down, I again felt like I was being watched, like an intense watch that makes you turn around, so I did slowly and carefully, as if not feeling its eyes on me. There was nothing behind me, or rather, maybe I hadn't seen it. As I was walking to the campfire, I heard thumps, like someone or something was running on four legs. Remembering it was the forest, after all, I stopped to see if it was an elk, fox, or something else. But then the horror hit me. The thump stopped as soon as I did. I was shocked so badly I didn't recognize my friend trying to get my attention. "Earth to you? What did you see? A bird or an elk?" I shook my head and my brow rose in surprise as I spoke. "No idea. Maybe it was my imagination." She laughed and dragged me toward the fire as I kept glancing back and having a bad feeling about it as soon as we all sat down. I thought that maybe, just maybe, the hunger was making me hear things, and yet something was off. One of the guys decided to visit the restroom facility, and strangely enough, he went with his plate of food that had a good chunk of meat on it. We all were chatting, already filled with delicious barbecue food, and he came back rushing, white as a ghost. We all looked at him as he explained, pointing to his plate. That only had sauce remains of where the piece of meat was. I swear I'm not pranking you guys. I was taking a leak and I felt like something whooshed past me, and I heard the sound the plastic plate made. So I turned around and I saw that my food was gone. He had a bewildered look on his face. Everyone, even the elders, suggested that it was a wild animal that had stolen it. But the look in his eyes told a different story. Some of the girls shared their meat with him, but yet we were all a bit worried. We all collected the plastic and remaining food into a plastic trash bag that was set aside for us to take when we left the campfire grounds. The elders suggested walking around a bit, showing us a few places with waterfalls and caves. As we walked across the horse path, looking at the indentations in the wet mud, we saw a few rather strange ones and stopped to observe. They were wide, like bear or maybe canine, but how could it be so wide and so large? Shrugging it off, we walked a bit further, and that feeling hit me again. As I turned my head, I spotted a rather old treehouse. I alerted the others in the group to continue ahead, not waiting for us. We all walked toward the house and saw the ladder. It was just pieces of wood planks nailed to the tree heading up. We decided to climb up, as we heard a few twigs being broken and rustling as if something was running around us. We stopped and decided to shrug it off. As we climbed in, Nick, the one who had lost the meat, was the last one to climb up, yelled and screamed, "Get inside now!" We all gathered into the treehouse, looking at him as if he was a lunatic. We looked at him for an explanation as he was shivering and trembling. I saw something huge down there run past me. We all panicked. I whispered, "It's a bear, right?" He looked around frantic as one of the boys took out a knife, which made me smile because it would be a toothpick towards such a huge animal. We heard some more running sounds. It was the sound of a four-legged animal. If it's a bear, could it climb up here? My mind screamed. We all stood still as the running now was accompanied by a growl. It wasn't bone-chilling, but soon we heard the next sound. It was the mix of a howl or a wolf mixed with a human howling in insufferable pain. We all froze. It felt like a horror movie. We heard something climbing up the tree as we all stood still, cowering in the back of the treehouse. Looking out of the open window, we saw a huge bear climbing up the tree. Has it sensed us? Was it hungry? My mind is going a mile a minute as I realized something. The bear wasn't even looking in our direction. It was looking down. I took a step closer to the window, and so did my friend. We both looked confused. What was wrong with this bear? I mean, I am happy it wasn't attacking us, but what in the name of everything could have scared a bear? The answer came with a loud snarl and growling sounds, accompanied by the thumps and scratches. We all looked down. I wish I didn't. This thing was huge. It was at least 8 feet tall. It had a large snout and very large canines. It was black and its ears pointed. The fur was black and its eyes were a yellowish. We were shocked, trying to process what this horrible creature was. We all retreated from the window as we thought it trained on the poor bear. Then someone was screaming our name. As I relaxed in relief, I peeked out the window to see this wolf-like creature retreat. Its body shape was the strangest of all. It seemed close to a human body, but more agile and much more powerful. We tried to climb down as we heard some sticks falling and scratching as if next to us. One of the girls screamed bloody murder, and we heard the thump and the bear running down the opposite side of the road. We all bolted, nearly stumbling and falling off as we saw the elders rushing toward us. We were paler than a paper sheet. Walking back, we saw a rather peculiar sight. The bonfire was broken up, and the trash bag was ripped open and food scraps were everywhere and gone. The group stood there petrified, and the elders checked for the animals around. When they found nothing, we picked up the trash again and left. This time, our group was practically running toward camp as the others mocked us. We tried to play it off as we ran back. I felt it again, the dread of being watched and thinking that at the campgrounds we'd be safe. We all headed toward the old tower. It was abandoned, and the bell inside was ripped off. The door was metal and heavy, so we decided to close it just in case. Gathering up, we all let out a deep breath and huff, as some decided to hit a smoke before the elders came back. "What the hell was that thing?" someone asked, inhaling their cigarette. "No idea. It was not a bear. It was bigger than that bear." Later, I was talking to another friend who was from the United States and was an exchange student coming to visit and learn more about our country. He gulped. "It's not a thing." He hardly spoke, as if something as a memory flashed across his face. "In America, I think we call them dogmen." Everyone looked at him bewildered. My grandpa encountered one while camping in the northern parts of Wisconsin. He said it was terrifying, even scarier than a horror movie, but it was gray, and it had red eyes. The eyes were what scared my granddad, and he ran away, leaving his tent behind. It was chasing after him, taunting my granddad. My granddad knew if he stopped, he was going to die, or possibly worse. So he hid in a cave, and the next morning, a group of rescue workers came and found him and helped him out of the forest. He said he'll never forget how terrified he was then. He even didn't return to retrieve his belongings. We all listened, realizing how just how lucky we were all to be alive and in one piece. But our peace was disturbed once again by this terrifying howling scream. Everyone started to look around like owls trying to find a source. Then I spotted it standing on its hind legs. It was something straight out of a horror movie. It seemed to be sniffing the air. Its ears were moving as it took a close step toward the barbed wire fence. We stood and looked at each other. I felt dread fill my whole body. My hands were sweating and my pulse of heart was skyrocketed. If I were to face it, I would be dead where I stood, and this realization made me whimper. Everyone was panicking once again as some of the guys slammed shut the metal door behind me. Slowly, I tried to come back to my senses and breathe steadily. We were quiet for a moment and then spoke. "We're not mental, I know it. People don't get mental together. This is real. This thing was chasing a bear through the woods." Everyone agreed silently that we were going to walk back quietly. Feeling somewhat safe, most of the group went to sleep, but I couldn't sleep that night as I was on edge. It turns out everyone who was in our group was on edge and didn't have a good night's sleep. You see, I was a skeptic and a non-believer, but this experience made me and my friends scared to ever go camping. Even if it was a huge group, I'd rather stay inside in the city. But what truly makes a non-believer a believer is an experience of facing it yourself. The bear was enough for me to set the uneasiness in the depths of my soul. Whatever you want to call this creature, it still wakes me up in cold sweats, looking frantically around and checking my door and windows. Sometimes I still have a feeling of being watched. Thanks for allowing me to share this. Today's second encounter, I shared this during the live stream. And it really got me thinking most of the night, actually. After the live stream, I was thinking about this experience. And I shared a good 20 encounters and had a lot of fun with y'all. But something about this, it really does go along with everything that I've been researching and we all discuss here. So, we live in northern Arizona, in a rural area on the edge of several thousand acres of grassland that, locally, we all call the prairie. The prairie is open with scattered small pines and juniper bushes, and around the edge of the prairie is a dense ponderosa pine forest. My husband and I live right next door to my mother. She is 81 years old and doesn't get around too well. I work from home and have a small office upstairs at her house, so that I'm around to help her during the day. So this was back in January. It was the 23rd at around 5:45 p.m. I was in my office and my mother was downstairs in her comfy chair, which faces out the great view of the prairie. I was working on my computer and suddenly I heard her hollering for me in a very alarmed tone. I ran downstairs thinking that either my dog was throwing up on the carpet or something was on fire. It was somewhere in that range of urgency. Let me add right here that my mother is very level-headed, not overly excitable, and 100% in her right mind, sharp as a tack. And she can also see pretty darn well for being 81. When I finally got to her, she was looking out into the prairie and said she saw something really weird. Later, she said it was the weirdest thing she'd ever seen. While she was describing it, I grabbed a pair of binoculars and looked to where she was pointing. She said that her first impression was that it was a horse, but then she immediately realized that it was not. She said that it reminded her of a horse wearing a cape or a giant bat, and that it was nothing she had ever seen before. It was tall, running upright on two legs and coming straight at her. Black in color, and had something flapping all around the upper part, like a cape fluttering or wings. She said, although she didn't see what it was, she knew she did not like it, and really didn't want it to get into the house. I could tell both at the time and when she talked about it over the next several days that it did rattle her quite a bit. Again, though, she is not prone to being nervous, and she does not share my interest in the strange and unusual. She said that she was looking up and spotted this thing coming her way, but then, as she watched it, appeared to crouch down and disappear next to a bush. The terrain on the prairie rolls just a little, so that would it be possible without it actually vanishing into thin air. As we were watching the area around that bush, my husband came in and we told him what was up, and he started watching as well. When we were all watching something again, just for a few seconds, it moved from where we were watching away to the right, where it disappeared again. My husband says that what he saw could have been two black ravens fighting. What I saw was very dark in color, and my first impression was something like a man running but hunched over, or maybe something like a back end of a bear. What my mom saw, and she didn't tell me this until weeks later, was an unnaturally tall, skinny black dog. The light was still quite good at this point, and my husband went to get our little drone to fly the prairie and see if he could spot anything, as I went upstairs to the windows with the binoculars to see what I could see from a higher vantage point. Neither of us saw a thing. Now, we do have black bear in the area, but I've never, in over 20 years, seen one out on the prairie in daylight. It's not impossible, but not likely, and even less likely that neither of us would have seen it moving away across the prairie. The next day, we went out to look at the spot where we had seen it, which was 300 yards at least from my mom's window. The ground was wet and muddy, but we found no tracks, although we were leaving very obvious footprints. I went and stood next to the bush where my mom saw it crouched down. Then I called her to ask to look and compare my height to what she had seen. She said that it was 1.5 to 2 times taller than I, and I am 5'4", making this creature somewhere between 8 to 10 feet in height. No wonder why she was freaking out. If it was a bear, it was running very well on its hind legs and waving a cape over its head. For good measure, I had also asked my mom if it could have possibly been an elk with a trash bag stuck on its antlers, and she said no, absolutely not. All super weird, but here's the part of the experience that I really had to think about much later. A couple of hours before this all happened, I had been out on the prairie with our dog for our daily walk. She roams around, digs holes, occasionally chases a rabbit, but almost never barks. That afternoon, she starts barking like crazy, hackles up, staring off in the distance, and at one point, she came running back to me with her tail tucked, which was very unlike her. I couldn't see any reason for it at all, which creeped me out a little because I had just then been thinking about a recent interview I had heard describing a Dogman experience. Specifically, I was thinking about the idea of dogmen guarding portals and also what I would do if I ever saw such a thing. So I started to think about it. We aren't that far from Sedona. Did we have a portal drift up to our way? A neighbor that we know pretty well had a pretty interesting UFO sighting over the prairie the summer before. Maybe we have a full-time portal. Who knows? All right, so with that experience, when I was thinking about it, I immediately thought back to the Skinwalker Ranch area. And one of my favorite experiences, and I've shared this 1,000 times because it is one of my favorite experiences that I've ever heard, is a Ute Native American sitting up on a ridge, and he's hunting. And he had been sitting stationary in this one location for a good amount of time. He hadn't moved. He was just waiting for some elk or something to come out. And all of a sudden, he sees this kind of void open no more than 3 feet from the ground. And he's trying to look into it, but it is just this black void. And he can see past this void. He can, it's just this black kind of hole in the middle of this field, just open. And he's a little shook because obviously the Ute had gone to war with the Navajo for centuries prior. But the Navajo used to torment the Ute with the Skinwalker. And if you look this up, I encourage everyone to Google everything because the information is right there. And not knowing is worse than knowing false information, I think. But the Navajo would use the Skinwalker and the legend of the Skinwalker as kind of a weapon of war. These black shamans, these black magic shamans would cloak up in coyote pelts or elk pelts and at night crawl into these villages, these Ute villages, and they would attack the men, and they would also get onto their homes and poison the people that were in their homes sleeping, and then they would run back. And of course, through centuries of storytelling and sharing of these lores and experiences, that's how the Skinwalker legend was born, supposedly. That, they'd see these animals running away after they were attacked, these Ute villages attacked, and then as they're running, they're turning into a human, or they're running at them and turning into an animal or a animal-like creature. And then eventually the legend turned into the transformation, which I don't know if it's true or not. I'd like to think that it is, the amount of experiences that I've heard from Navajo country and such. And there are many Native American cultures that have a shape-shifting like creature that has a lot to do with black magic practitioners, shamans. The Ojibwe have the bear walker. There's an amazing thesis that I wrote or read. It's like 100 pages long, but it had me glued. Like, I was like, whoa, this is truly awesome. Written by a Ojibwe college professor. But, you know, you've got that portal, and then you've got this portal, and this large creature's coming out. This poor old lady, whatever she saw. So yeah, I really like that Arizona experience. But the Skinwalker Ranch one is just as crazy. So really quick, I'm not allowed to talk about this, and I purposely put it in the middle of this video. So my book was supposed to come out the 23rd. It is still coming out. I am not allowed to give any information about it or why or anything. I'm being forced to take 2 chapters out. I can't talk about it anymore, but I wanted to give you guys the heads up. So that's all I'm going to say for right now, and I apologize. Today's third experience. My Uncle Bobby spent a lot of his time in Honey Island Swamp, as did my dad. Fishing, hunting, and camping, my dad and uncle loved to play jokes with me. One morning we went to the bait traps to check the lines, and off on one of the banks was a timber wolf. My uncle said that he had never seen one in the swamp before, only in the timbered areas. Very odd. So we went fishing later that night at camp. Just from returning from fishing, I was on the front of the boat. As we soon docked, I jumped out without even looking, and my dad and uncle just made me wrap the rope around my hand in case an alligator attack or something they would never say. My uncle threw the boat in reverse, and I went into the water. My father grabbed my arm and yanked me back into the boat quick. My uncle started shooting. I thought it was an alligator fixing to come and get me. Come to find out, the timber wolf followed us all the way back to camp, and when I got out of the boat, he was going to jump or pounce on me. My uncle killed it 4 feet from where I was standing. The timber wolf was huge and aggressive. It took 5 .44 Magnum shots to kill it. I was 14 at the time. 4 years later, we were getting ready to run lines. My dad and I got to the swamp real late. The road was muddy, and even with the lights on high beamed and fog lights on, it was dark. Honey Island Swamp is very scary and a dark place at night. You cannot see 10 feet in front of you with a truck light on, and my uncle was already there field dressing about 15 catfish and a loggerhead turtle. Once we got there, my uncle called my dad over to him. When I started to walk over, my dad told me to get the gear and food out of the truck. My uncle was basically raised in the swamp and knew everything about it. Smells, water changes, everything. If something was wrong, he would know. My uncle and dad were outside fixing to start to drink. They kept looking around as if something was wrong. I asked, but they ignored me and told me to stop talking. I was there also trying to decide on drinking my uncle's homemade whiskey. Right when I was going to drink some, there was a loud crashing sound. There was running and thumping on a tree in the woods. My dad and uncle reached inside and grabbed the biggest guns they could find and gave me a .45 to shoot. They told me that if I see anything move, to shoot, and don't stop until I run out. My uncle had his .44 mag and an AR-15. My dad had a 10-gauge shotgun and a .50 caliber pistol. My dad and uncle turned on the lights all around the camp. It seemed like we could see something moving right outside of the lights where the dark started, with ember-colored eyes. It looked like something crouched down, and when it stood up, it was friggin' huge. The smell would gag you, a very horrible stench like rotten eggs in sewer. They shot a couple of the rounds in the direction of the sound and eyeshine. There was a loud, high-pitched scream that would make the hair on all of your body stand on end, and cold chills ran all over my body as well. This was not human. I'll be honest. After I heard that, I pissed myself. I had never heard that noise before. They stayed up all night talking about this thing. The next morning, they searched the area and found a huge limb that had been broken off some 8 to 9 feet up the tree. There was a thin blood trail that went deep into the wooded area where my uncle said it wasn't safe to go, and that scared me, and to this day I will never step foot in the Honey Island swamp again. On my uncle's deathbed, I asked him about it, and he told me to ask my dad. I did. My dad was diagnosed with leukemia in 2007 and died 3 months later. Prior to his death, he told me the story about the Honey Island swamp monster. It was huge and hairy. It was supposed to be reddish or brown hair, short on its body, and somewhat long on the neck and head area. But when he smells blood or rotten organs, fish and turtle guts, it comes to the area and tries to scare you off or possibly attack you. It could rip the throat out of a wild swamp boar with one slash of its claws. My dad asked me to promise him never to go there again. That is one promise that I am willing to keep until I die. Today's fourth experience. I live in southern Georgia near the Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge. It's more rural wilderness here than people realize. The Okefenokee is 402,000 acres and home to all kinds of wildlife not seen anywhere else in the world. My uncle is a park ranger and has worked at the Okefenokee for 15 plus years. Back in the early 2000s, park rangers at Okefenokee had a ride-along policy, whereby they could take friends and family out with them on their shift. Often this was done for local officials, wildlife advocates, and such. But some rangers would randomly take family members too, just for fun. I'm not sure this is formally approved, but I know my uncle had taken just about everyone in our family at some point in time. The event that I'm going to share happened in April of 2007 while on a ride-along with my uncle. I was 20 at the time and had just gotten back from college for the summer. My family was on an extended vacation already, and I had about a week before I would join them. I asked my uncle if he wanted to go fishing one day, but he suggested I come along with him to work instead, just for fun. At this time, the Bugaboo Fire had just started. We weren't too close to it, so most park resources were dedicated to the fire at this point. But my uncle and I were not near it. I remember him saying that. I met him at the Bolt Center after dinner sometime, and we got an airboat. The other ranger who was supposed to come with us was called to the fire-related issue. I remember this because that was actually the first time I learned of the fire. Listening to him talk about it on the phone, then my uncle filled me in. So we headed out, just the two of us. I don't know for sure, but because we met at the Bolt Center, I assumed we started west down the waterway. I don't know where we went other than this, as it was getting dark and I had no idea really even where we were, and I actually didn't care much. 30 minutes in, we found two kayakers night fishing, which is not allowed at night. Before we got close to them, my uncle said they were regulars here. He was supposed to accompany them back, but he said he's confident they'd be fine to get back on their own. We stopped next to them and started talking. They were breaking the rules, but obviously they were friends with my uncle. They said they'd seen more gators in the water than ever before. My uncle had mentioned this on our ride, as we had seen a dozen. But he didn't say much about that. These guys insisted it was unlike anything they had ever seen. They said literally thousands, plus lots of other wildlife close to shore. My uncle blamed it on the fire, but they agreed. I was spooked, the wildlife, and driving them to the waterways. These guys insisted we follow them up a few hundred yards to the fork in the creek, and we did. I kid you not, more than at least 200 to 300 gators in this tiny little area, packed in like sardines. It was something to see. It was just about black dark outside, but the airboat had a massive light on the front, and it was amazing. They were almost layered in 2 levels. That's how crowded the water was. What amazed me most was how close the kayakers were willing to get to these gators. Anyway, we sat there for a couple of minutes. My uncle was fiddling with a camera for a photograph of this event. Lots of bellowing and small fights here and there. The gators weren't huge. They don't get too big in South Georgia, not like in South Florida, but what an awesome sight. Then, maybe 2 minutes of looking, mayhem breaks out. We hadn't moved at all in 2 minutes, and the gators didn't seem to mind us much, but something spooked them, and for a solid 30 seconds the water was just insane, with gators flopping all over the place, scrambling under the water in every direction. The kayakers bolted immediately as the gators were hitting their boats. My uncle seemed unaffected, but was photographing everything. That's when I saw what I saw, the strangest creature I'd ever seen in my life. Animal? I say animal, just because it wasn't a person. It's hard to explain. It was like part bear, part primate. I only had a peripheral from it, from the airboat, so I couldn't make it out too well. I say bear because of the black shine on its coat and the snout, but I later wondered if it might have been because the coat was wet. It was thick either way. Primate because how it moved. Though it was walking on all fours, I could barely see its eyes. I only knew there were eyes there because of the reflections in the dark. This thing was huge, the size of a large bear, even bigger, but thinner and more wiry. The angle of its limbs were downright creepy, and the dexterity moving slowly along the shoreline gave me goosebumps. It almost moved like a spider, using, like I said, all fours, but not like a horse would. Like a spider, which sounds strange, but that's the only thing I can describe it as. It was right on the edge of the creek looking at us. I didn't look to see if the gators were swimming away from that spot, but it was just mayhem in the water anyway. I pointed and yelled something unintelligible, but my uncle kept photographing the gators. I didn't even know what words I said. I think I said WTH. My uncle wouldn't have known what I was talking about other than the gators, so he never even looked up. I looked back at him to get his attention, but he looked right into the boat's crazy powerful light when I did that, and then couldn't see again for a little bit. But the time his eyes were adjusted, probably 60 seconds later, this creature was gone. No photos, no other witnesses to this creature. I started to tell my uncle what I had seen, but I felt like an idiot when he gave me a very suspicious look. I know almost nothing about the outdoors to begin with, so I just shut my mouth. But somewhere there are photos of gators to at least prove this. I've seen those because I saw my uncle showing them to my dad a few weeks later. Anyway, I was on edge for the rest of the night. My uncle dropped me back off at midnight, and he kept working, and I went home. I literally had goosebumps the whole drive back, feeling like I had seen the thing on my drive. I've done some research into this area, just so little evidence. I don't know what I saw that night, but it was something. Hoping someone here has some ideas or similar experiences. Last thing, why so many gators? Actually wondering if this thing was feeding them. I only ever seen this many gators piled up at a gator park during feeding time. I really believe this creature was feeding the gators, but when it moved a certain way or somehow our boat got too close, they got spooked. But nothing else explains this except maybe the fire several miles away. Through the fire was, to my memory, no big deal at this time. Today's final experience. Jeremiah, a retired law enforcement officer as well as a former employee of the Oregon Bureau of Land Management. He has also been an avid hunter and fisherman while growing up in the rural Oregon town. So Jeremiah had plenty of outdoor and wildlife experience. He and his father-in-law were on an elk hunting trip. Unfortunately, the father-in-law had suffered an injury on the first day and was forced to remain at camp afterward. There was an arrangement that the father-in-law would pick up Jeremiah at a designated time and location later in the day. The day of the hunting was quite frustrating for Jeremiah since the elk herds were more skittish than usual. Many times the elk would easily spook and disperse. He spent most of the morning tracking the elk through fairly rough terrain. In fact, it was an area in which he had been unfamiliar with. At this point, he found it necessary to remove some of his heavy clothing since the day was warming and he was starting to feel a headache develop. As he started removing his heavy jacket, placing it in his pack, he then retrieved some water and he noticed movement in his right peripheral. As he closely observed the movement, he realized that he was within 50 feet of a hairy, black-colored creature that he did not recognize. He started watching. He realized that this creature was upright and approximately 8.5 feet in height. Its ears were the first feature that he distinguished, as they were fixed high on its head and pointed. Also, the creature had a long snout unlike that of a Sasquatch or a bear. In fact, he was close enough to see bright, ember-colored eyes that seemed to radiate light. The creature now was watching him intently as well, and was oblivious, obviously upset by his presence. The creature leaned against a tree and then suddenly began shaking the tree violently. He didn't seem to hear the growling or other sounds other than the tree moving back and forth. The unknown creature then leaned forward, dropped his ears, and studied him as he began to raise his weapon, a .270. At this point, the creature stood fully erect. That's when he realized that this beast was canine-like. The body was described as looking like a werewolf from the Van Helsing film, extremely muscular at the broad shoulders, heavy upper body, tapered waist, thick arms and legs. He flipped off the safety and lightly fingered the trigger, not knowing what to expect from this creature. He began to move toward a nearby logging road and put distance between him and the beast. As he was walking, he was looking behind him, but the creature was no longer in his sight. He began to move faster on this logging trail, heading in the direction where his father-in-law was scheduled to meet him. After several minutes, he began to hear movement in the thick brush as well as heavy footsteps and panting. He was positive that this creature had followed him. At this point, he swung around and released a shot from the .270 in the direction of the sounds. He heard this creature scamper away. He reached his rendezvous spot and waited nervously for his father-in-law to show up. Just before the darkness started to descend, his father-in-law arrived. As soon as he jumped into the vehicle, his father-in-law asked if he was feeling okay. It was that obvious that he was experiencing anxiety and fear after his harrowing encounter. He didn't disclose any details of this encounter to his father-in-law or his own wife. In fact, after he began to research the creature, he decided not to tell anyone. Eventually, he did. A friend who thought he was crazy. Anyway, he has not been back to that location since that terrifying day, and does plan on making a trip back, but being accompanied with several of his hunting buddies with large guns. All right, folks, that was today's upload. I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. I'd like to thank you all for supporting the channel. It is, after all, your support that keeps the channel growing and going, and what gives folks like us a chance and a place to share our experiences and theories judgment-free, just simply treated with the respect that we all deserve. Thank you. That is because of all of you. Everyone, please stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, pets, family, and friends. These creatures and events are real. They're happening. They are out there and dangerous. Share this information with your loved ones, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions. Never stop searching for the answers or the truth. And God bless.